Ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome to Center for Strategic and International Studies, Jakarta, in the public seminar on ASEAN Cyber Norms, National Impact and Way Forward, held by Center for Strategic and International Studies. Ladies and gentlemen, as the agenda goes, we will first have welcoming remarks from Dr. Phillips Vermonte as the Executive Director of CSIS, followed by a report launch towards a resilient regional cybersecurity perspectives and challenges in Southeast Asia, presented by Dr. Fitriani. Then there will be two panel sessions, first on the development of ASEAN cybersecurity norms and challenges, and second on the national impact of cybersecurity norms before we have lunch. Without further ado, I would like to invite Dr. Phillips Vermonte as the Executive Director of CSIS to give his welcoming remarks. Dr. Vermonte, the floor is yours.
Very good morning, colleagues, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I'd like to thank you all for coming to CSIS. We only prepare half auditorium. Apparently, the numbers that are coming seems to go beyond our expectation. So thank you for that. It is my honor to welcome all of you to the public seminar on ASEAN cyber norms, national impact and way forward. I rarely have a prepared welcoming remark, but because I have to tell you that I am no expert on this particular issues, and then also this is the indication of how CSIS now is getting involved in this issue on cybersecurity. We started to devise our program on cybersecurity about 2 years ago, but at that time we do not have expertise. We only knew the scratch, but then since then we tried to develop a team within CSIS to study this issue more closely. And now today, under the leadership of Dr. Fitriani of CSIS, we are able to have this public seminar on ASEAN cyber norms, national impact and way forward. This seminar is our attempt to gather leading cyber experts from the region to discuss the latest ASEAN Ministerial Conference on Cybersecurity, or AMCCs, in principle endorsement of the 11 voluntary non-binding norms recommended by the 2015 UN groups of governmental experts on development in the field of information and telecommunication in the context of international securities. There are more than 100 characters there. The seminar serves for 4 important goals. Number 1, of course, we want to increase public awareness on regional security, on regional cybersecurity. Second, we would like to exchange what has been learned at the regional level. Number 3, we want to solidify the network of ASEAN cybersecurity scholars, think tanks, and experts. And number 4, to uncover cybersecurity priority issues that could be proposed to relevant ASEAN policymakers. So having this goal in mind, we are delighted to host this distinguished group, consists of government officials, cybersecurity experts, think tanks, and academics from across Indo-Pacific. I thank you all the speakers coming from 10 ASEAN countries, as well as from Australia, and for your contribution to the book that will be launched later on. We do hope that the seminar could facilitate constructive dialogue between practitioners and academics to further define, shape, and understand the emerging issues of cybersecurity both at the regional and international level. Talking about regional issues, for us, it is imperative to also discuss ASEAN and its long-standing commitment to regional peace and stability. Challenge through the cyber arena is completely a new challenge for ASEAN that was built around the time when sovereignty was the prime concern of the countries in the region. We do notice that ASEAN has had two monumental masterpieces on that matter, namely the TAC, the Treaty of Amity and Cooperation, and Zone of Peace, Freedom and Neutrality, ZOPFAN. But the forthcoming challenge for countries in the region is actually ensuring the implementation of those regional instruments are also implemented at the cyber level, be it by establishing online cyber norms or other necessary cyber measures. It is also important for us to formulate some recipes in addressing the existing regional gaps between individuals, households, businesses, and geographic areas to access information, communication, and telecommunication. Hopefully, with all the experts and the participation of all of us here today in the auditorium, we could contribute one or some solutions to those challenges. Just to add some, CSIS has also conducted a baseline research on cybersecurity and a related capacity building workshop for ASEAN think tanks back in November 2018. We are glad to share what we have learned from both events. Finally, I would like to officially start this public seminar and book launching event. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your warm welcome, Dr. Vermonte. Now, I welcome you to the stage, Dr. Fitriani, researcher to the International Department of CSIS, to launch CSIS baseline research combined with a compilation of workshop presentations on ASEAN cyber norms. ASEAN cybersecurity capacity building for think tank that was held in November 2018. Dr. Fitriani, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Bonita. Good morning, esteemed colleague, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for being here. As CSIS is one of the oldest think tank in Indonesia, we are always eager to learn about new domain, being one of them is cyber. Cyber has grown opportunities and challenges to increasingly capture the attention of practitioner, government officials, and scholar alike, just like my executive director, Dr. Vermonte, have mentioned. However, we understand that, at least in Indonesia, our understanding is there's still a lack of awareness of what is cyber and what is needed to be done in terms of increasing the stability and safety and security of cyber realm. Because of that, CSIS is trying to create a publication and an attempt of sharing our baseline research on the Asian cybersecurity resilient. In this publication, we attempt to share our discussion and knowledge from the region. And because of that, I would like to thank you all for the contributors that participate in the writing of the baseline research, as well as the compiled version of the workshop report. First, I would like to thank the team of CSIS that conduct the baseline research. At CSIS, we have our cybersecurity team, Mr. Naufal Armia Arifin, Mr. Baltazar Crisetia, and Mr. Christian Parera, and I am being the only female here myself. The baseline research has identified how the regional cybersecurity characteristic is. First, we have to admit the cyber realm is multifaceted and divergent, as well as how ASEAN countries are diverse culturally, politically, and economically. There is still some digital divide. Being said that, not all the Asian member states have the same access and ability to access and control the cyber realm. And lastly, although with this caveat, the cyber is still actually a field where it has increasing opportunities for the interconnectedness and opening windows for the future digital economy for the region. Therefore, the baseline research found 4 lessons learned for ASEAN to move forward in cyber security and cyber norms. First, the cybersecurity should not be an elitist topic. It should always include not only the tech geek, all those that knows how the ICT world is, but also lawmaker, increasingly civil servant, government that actually provides services through online platform, and also civil society that can actually increase awareness of people's rights to the internet. Secondly, there is a need for public and private sector collaboration to build upon the opportunities. Thirdly, the norm building is equally important because this digital framework is connected somehow to the physical infrastructure development. Fourthly, that we actually still being here to increase our knowledge on cybersecurity is the human dimension of cyber sometimes are not being well developed as much as we want. And that baseline research you can read in our publication. Following the baseline research, the second subsequent part of the publication consists of material presented at the Cybersecurity Capacity Building Workshop, as well mentioned by the MC, Bonita, and my Director Executive, Philip Formente. Section 2 of the publication is on Global Shift and the Asian Way, where Ms. Candice Trandai informed us of the trend and tendencies, principles and norms in cybersecurity, looking at how government across the world are actually building its own cybersecurity capacity in security and defense force, and what it means for us. And there also Mr. Miguel Gomez that offered his opinion on how cyber norm is shaped in the region. Session 3 consists of the understanding possible challenge on cyber realm in the region. Ms. Farlina Said discussed how the major powers play in the cyber competition in ASEAN. Professor Alan Chong raised the issue that we should be concerned of the human dimension of cyber ASEAN. Mr. Baltazar Kisetia examined the digital divide in the region, and Mr. Wahyudi Djafar pointed out the loophole on the cybersecurity policy in Southeast Asia. The next section is the shared of case studies from the region so we can learn from each other. The Vietnam government share its experience on the government-private cybersecurity cooperation, written by Dr. Lam Viet Nguyen. The Philippines share its prioritization of the cybersecurity issue. Meanwhile, Thailand Philippines, thank you for Ms. Janalin Buan Makalinau that contribute the chapter. And from Thailand, we have the writing of Mr. Napol Wara Pratep on concerning Thailand cybersecurity arrangement. And Cambodia, from Cambodia, we have Mr. Tiarakun that share the Cambodian perspective on cybersecurity and how it deals with local national legislation. The topic of the fifth and final section of the book focused on the priorities and way forward. Mr. Situran Pondraj discussed the importance of cyber as an economic enabler, as well recognizing Asian development in adopting cyber norms. I would like to highlight that the last section of the book is currently in the process of publishing. And as well, the final publication will be ready to distribute for public in February onwards. But hopefully, this publication will help to raise the awareness on cybersecurity issue in the region. I thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Fitriani, for the presentation. CSIS will now present the publication titled Towards a Resilient Regional Cybersecurity, Perspectives and Challenges in Southeast Asia. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to welcome to the stage to accept the book, Deputy Director for ASEAN Security Affairs, Directorate for ASEAN Political Security Cooperation, Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Indonesia, Lauti Nia Asri Suteja. I would like to call Deputy Director for International Organization and Multilateralism of the Coordinating Ministry for Political, Legal, and Security Affairs of the Republic of Indonesia, Anindita Harimurti Axioma. I would like to call ASEAN Political Security Community Analysis and Monitoring Division of the ASEAN Secretariat, Niki Prawitya. And lastly, Subdirectorate of Government Protection, Information Security Governance, Cyber Body and National Encryption Agency or BSSN, Welly Puji Ginanjar. Thank you, representatives, and Dr. Vermonte. Distinguished guests, we have reached to the first panel session, which discusses on development of ASEAN cybersecurity norms and challenges, moderated by Dr. Fitriani. Without further delay, Dr. Fitriani, the floor is yours.
Good morning. Thank you for coming today. As the schedule informs us, today we are really happy to have the contributor of the book to join me today to have a discussion and also expert remarks or comment from the region. First, I would call Mr. Situraj Ponraj, the Director of International Cyber Policy Office from Singapore Cybersecurity Agency, to come to the stage. Next, I will call Mr. Wahyudi Djafar, Research Director from Institute for Policy, Research and Advocacy, ELSAM. Third, I would like to call Ibu Miss Farlina Said, Researcher Institute for Strategic and International Studies, Malaysia. At least we have women in the panel. 2 women, very good. And last but not least, I would like to call Mr. Bart Hogeveen, that come from a long way from Canberra, Analyst from Cyber Policy Center, Australian Strategic Policy Institute, please. Right. Today we are here to discuss the development of ASEAN cybersecurity norms and challenge. First, I would like to invite Mr. Situraj Ponraj to actually explain and highlight, enlighten us on how is the development of ASEAN cybersecurity, and perhaps we will continue on in the Q&A for details. But for now, for each panelist, I would give around 10-15 minutes. If you need, you can go a little bit further, but I think 15 minutes would be good. Please, Mr. Situraj.
Good morning, everybody. Firstly, I'd like to express my appreciation to the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Indonesia for hosting this very important meeting and inviting me to speak on this topic. I think it's heartening to see the interest in this room towards the issue of cybersecurity norms of behavior. And I wanted to preface my remarks by saying a few things, making 3 points actually. The first is, I'm no expert in this. My office, which is the International Cyber Policy Office in the Cybersecurity Agency of Singapore, looks after this issue together, and we work very closely together with our ASEAN partners, our extra-regional partners, as well as ASEAN Secretariat, in grappling a very important issue, which is, in our perspective, multidisciplinary. Cybersecurity is no longer a technical topic, which is why you have someone from the Cybersecurity Agency talking about something which is beyond the operational. The second point I wanted to make is that we have an understanding when we speak about norms of behavior, and the ASEAN leaders, when they made their statement on the Cybersecurity Cooperation in April last year, they had asked us to look at voluntary norms of behaviors in cyberspace, taking reference from the 11 norms recommended and proposed in the 2015 UNGGE report. And so that is a good starting point to talk about norms. What are norms? Well, the first is that norms are not rules which bind you. For example, if I come to you and I see Dr. Fitri and I put out my hand and I want to shake her hand, it is the norm that she puts out her hand and shakes my hand and smiles at me. It is acceptable behavior. It is something that we all agree should be done or should not be done. Or if I'm holding a glass of water, it is a norm that I do not pour the water on my colleague sitting on my left. So there are behaviors that the international community agrees or your society agrees should be done and should not be done. And if we look at the UNGGE report in 2015, and I'll speak a little bit more about developments in the UN, I think there are limiting norms which say what states should do and what states should not do. Those are limiting norms and those are positive norms which you could do. And the objective of this, and I want to say this, which is why it's important, and Singapore together with our ASEAN partners are so committed to norms, is that when we can agree on how we behave, it fosters predictability and stability in cyberspace. So what happens is that when we know that we can trust each other to behave in a certain way, then there is stability and predictability. There is confidence in cyberspace as we work together in a very dynamic and exciting future, the digital age. So that is the key thing. The objective is to foster stability and predictability by identifying behaviors that we think will foster trust and confidence in cyberspace. And therefore, there is a great need, and I think that's the reason why the ASEAN leaders have asked us to also plug in to the wider international conversation, because cyberspace is transboundary. It's not so easy to say that the problem stops in this region or in this country. The problem that starts in one country can quickly spread, and we have seen examples of this, where a cyber attack or malicious cyber activity spreads from one part of the globe very quickly to other parts of the globe. And therefore, it is important for us to take both a regional, a national, a regional, as well as an international perspective, and to support international conversations on this. And in this regard, I would like to state that we are very, very appreciative of the efforts of Malaysia, who were part of the international conversation, the UNGGE in 2015, and also Indonesia, who were part of the last UNGGE. And so ASEAN has been making its voice heard and felt, and I think this is very important. So having said that, the key thing is that, as you know, since our last meeting or the last workshop, cyber has gained significant momentum at the UN, and during the UN General Assembly last year, 2 resolutions were tabled to set up an open-ended working group, as well as a new UN group of governmental experts, or UNGGE, to discuss cyber security issues, including norms, confidence building measures, capacity building, international law, and cyberspace. Singapore believes that both platforms can be complementary and will be valuable to advance international discussions on cyber norms so as to work towards a safer and more resilient cyberspace. We support these, Singapore supports the continuation of international discussions at the UN, because it is an inclusive platform where all countries, both big and small, and you know how small Singapore is, have a chance to be seen and heard. And ASEAN, as we spoke, has made significant progress. The ASEAN leader statement was the first ever statement on this matter, that we ought to consider and develop norms. And I think the speaker in the opening address, we heard about the ASEAN Ministerial Conference, where participants felt and subscribed in principle to the norms and said that this is something that ASEAN could consider further. And today I've been asked to speak about the challenges. Now, I wouldn't want to speak about the challenges. I think there are lots of challenges, but I think I would like to speak in terms of building blocks. What are the building blocks to building and adopting norms in ASEAN, norms of behavior in cyberspace in ASEAN? And there are three building blocks that, from our perspective, we have identified as my office and has worked with partners over the last 3 years. We have a ASEAN Cyber Capacity Program in Singapore. We've been running workshops, and we identified some building blocks that may help move forward the norms conversation in ASEAN more resolutely with greater speed. And I'd like to share these with you, because some of them were obvious to us when we started, some of them were not so obvious. And the first I'd like to speak is building awareness around key cyber policy issues, including norms. When we launched our workshops last year, in 2016, pardon me, it just seems like last year, but it's 2016. We run yearly workshops for, I think there's 6 or 8 workshops a year for director level officials, and we've got officers from all ASEAN countries joining us, sharing their experience, sharing their wisdom, and inputting into the process. And we also work with industry and academia to run these workshops, because, as I said during the workshop last year in CSIS, this truly needs to be a multi-stakeholder effort. The cyber ecosystem is bigger than governments, and therefore we invite these people. We realize that one of the key things that may need to be done is to build awareness around the concept of norms. What are norms? What do they consist of? How do we implement them? And how do we work with the public sector, with the private sector, in order to have these norms effectively implemented? And we find that when we invite the representatives from around the region, one of the key building blocks that we need to put in place, and we invite 3 people per country. Let me explain. We invite from each country an official from the central policy making agency or ministry, and this could be in the Prime Minister's office, it could be the President's office, the Home Ministry. In many countries it's different. We invite someone from the Incident Response Agency. In Singapore, it's also the CSA. It could be the NACSA, the National Cybersecurity Agency in Malaysia, the BSSN, the Cryptographic Agency in Jakarta, ETDA. So we invite someone from the Incident Response. And thirdly, we invite someone from the MFA to join us for this and to share their inputs. We do this because of a particular reason. Cyber, in our perspective, is a wicked problem. It's a problem that cannot be solved by any one ministry or agency because cybersecurity concerns spread across different agencies. In many countries, the responsibility for different parts of cybersecurity fall into different agencies. For example, in Singapore, Cybersecurity Agency looks after national cyberspace, protection of critical infrastructures, but cybercrime is spearheaded by the Ministry of Home Affairs. Defense-related cyber is, of course, under the MINDEF. So these are important things. So when we invite these people, it's important to build awareness because the idea or the concept behind norms is not immediately apparent to everyone across government. So this, you're right, she's given me 2 more minutes, and so it's okay, I've got only 2 more points. So the thing is, when we started doing this, we realized that building norms awareness is of great importance. Understanding norms is important, and we should focus on building awareness. The second is, of course, building cross-government communication. When you have 3 people from 3 different parts of government, it is not immediately apparent how people work together on cybersecurity issues. We have tabletop exercises during our capacity building, and we had this particular scenario, and we are doing this again and again because it's fun to do and it's so effective. We throw a scenario and we say, look, now your country is, or this imaginary country is under cyber attack. What will you do? And so we got 3 people, one a policy person, one an incident response person, and the third is an MFA person. The incident response person says, well, I'm going to go do this, 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 this. The policy person looks and tries to be helpful, and everybody ignores the MFA person. And we tell them, look, if this is an attack, if it's coming from abroad, don't you think the MFA is just as important? Don't you have to include the MFA in your considerations? And they both look, and everybody looks at us and says, what are you talking about? And the MFA person sometimes looks surprised that he or she is involved in this process. So it's important to build cross-government communication strategies and tactics in implementing norms. And finally, multidisciplinary capacity building. I think this is important. Capacity building is not just about technical expertise. We need to build capacity. We need to build experts in the region who understand these issues, who may go to international fora to explain the ASEAN perspective on this. We have tried to do this with our capacity building programs, focus on building strategies, on norms, on legislation, international law, and cyberspace. We work with partners internationally, including Australia, the Netherlands. The important thing is this: we need to build a group, a community of experts in the region who are able to articulate the positions of the region as far as norms are concerned. And to end, I think that we believe very strongly, both nationally, regionally, and internationally, cybersecurity is a team sport. It is not, we are not playing squash. It's not us against the wall. It's a football match, and we've got to bring the various stakeholders together. And only when we can get everyone together and deciding on a formation to play, as you can see, I like soccer, then we can score the goal. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Conrad. But the question is, who's competing against who in this football match?
So that's the thing. So all of us, the whole region, is in the same team. The whole world is in the same team against the guys who are trying to. So that's the thing, right? That's the best part of it all.
All right, thank you. Now we would like to call Mr. Wahyudi Djafar from ELSAM to give a little bit explanation of how the Asian cyber norm can actually help in the encouragement of human rights protection, perhaps, or maybe the caveat there is. Please, Mr. Wahyudi Djafar.
Thank you,
10,
Mrs.
15 minutes,
Okay.
not more. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Fitriani. Good morning, everyone, and I would like to thank you for having me, and thanks for CSIS for the greatest opportunity for us to discuss about how the situation and how the ASEAN respond to discuss about the cybersecurity norms in the region. But I will focus on the debate between the human rights and cybersecurity, especially in the region, because currently so many critics to the ASEAN governments related to the cybersecurity bills look like in the Thailand for last year, and also Australian government also gets the letters from the UN Special Rapporteur on the right to privacy about the cybersecurity law proposed by the Australian government last year. We will start to discuss about the human rights and internet as a legal base or the fundamental base to discuss about the relation between the human rights and the cybersecurity. Which if discuss about the internet, currently internet is an important tool for human rights promotion since it contributes to give broader understanding on international human rights standards, the provision and principles. And the new technology has opened an alternative path to convey expression and opinion and transfer knowledge. So human rights currently as important tools to fulfillment and protection of the rights in the world. And however, other than giving new alternative, the impact of technology have also caused a number of serious concerns, especially related to the problems such as hate speech in Indonesia include, especially also disinformation issue, fake news, hoax, etc., and also the intrusion to someone of privacy, mass surveillance, etc. As a result, many countries then claim internet, which is managed by private, has disturbed their national security. They started that for the public interest and security reasons, the control over internet must be conducted, which then implicates to the access restriction. The implication, for example, the practice of the filtering and the blocking of the internet content, etc. In response to that, there needs to be a balance between the need to protect freedom of expression and right to privacy, and the need to protect cybersecurity as part of also human rights principles. And how the human rights principles protect of the online platform and also the cybersecurity. For the first time in 2012, the UN Human Rights Council adopted resolution which affirmed that the rights everyone has when they are offline also adhere to when they are online. So the similar protection between offline and online activity. Then in 2013, they also adopted the resolution which affirmed that some rights everyone has when they are offline also adhere when they are online, including right to privacy. It is a response of the Snowden reports and also the practices of mass surveillance in the world. The SAMS country get the initiative to release of the resolution on the privacy in the digital age. And in 2014, the Human Rights Council importantly outlined how governments should respond to cybersecurity threats, calling on states to address address security concern on the internet in accordance with their international human rights obligation to ensure protection of freedom of expression, freedom of association, privacy, and other human rights online, including through national democratic, transparent institution based on the rule of law in a way that ensures freedom and security on the internet. And the last, the UN General Assembly report for the establishment of the governmental group of experts also established an international humanitarian law applies online as offline. So starting the efforts to address the security of ICTs must go hand in hand with respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms set forth in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and other international instruments. So the law armed conflict in the offline instrument also apply to the online cyber war. How about the tension between cybersecurity and human rights? The first, the conflict or tension between security and human rights, especially privacy and freedom of expression, is actually not something new. However, the more developed internet technology use has implicated to the rise of conflict level in cyber world. And to bring forth the right for safely, the antinomy between cybersecurity and human rights has emerged as part of the impact of the information and technology innovation. Such situation often happens as an effect of the unclear definition of the national security, public order, public moral, or boundary of scope for the state secrecy. And a number of countries, for example, has the side problems as a result from the inaccuracy in translating the security region to conduct any measures of restriction. For the second, national security, based on the argumentation of the national security, a state conducts mass surveillance and internet censorship, and it is also going in the South Asian regions. And the need to balance human rights and cybersecurity towards the principles or reference to responding the tension. The cybersecurity policy which considers human rights aspect is needed to bridge between the internet functional need and security condition in its use. And cybersecurity is important to ensure the openness and internet freedom. On the contrary, the cyber insecurity will demand the individual rights and harden the information exchange, revert to clan watcher. And therefore, in formulating the policy, the state must be fully harmonized and proportionate in human rights protection, especially in the freedom of expression and right to privacy. And as a consequence, the regulatory model must refer to various human rights international convention. There must have a meeting point between the cybersecurity needs and overall human rights international instrument. And how about the human rights protection and cybersecurity in ASEAN? Through all ASEAN country has been the state party of the ICCPR until today, just 6 countries in the ASEAN region as a state party of the ICCPR, Philippines, Thailand, Laos, Vietnam, Cambodia, and Indonesia. If referring to ASEAN human rights declarations, ASEAN countries acknowledge the need of guaranteeing human rights protection as specified in the covenant. It also including freedom of expression and right to privacy, also granted by the declaration. If refer to paragraph 21, refer to paragraph 23. And for the cybersecurity issue, if we refer to joint statement of ASEAN leaders related to cybersecurity cooperation, it also affirmed the need of harmonization of various international convention instruments, including human rights, to ensure peace and stability and promoting an open, secure, stable, accessible, and peaceful information and communication technology environment. And the national constitution of the ASEAN country have actually given to guarantee for that, for example in Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines. And how the cybersecurity policy responds in the ASEAN? Of 10 ASEAN countries, there are only 2 which specifically have cybersecurity law, Singapore and Vietnam. Thailand is currently at the final stage of discussion to deliberate, but there also has so many problems with the debate about the freedom of speech and right to privacy. Malaysian government plans to issue this year for discuss of the cybersecurity law. Will Indonesia, the initiative for discussion just started in this year, maybe after the general election. Related to personal data protection, in response to the high threat of the data theft, of 10 ASEAN countries, there are only 4 which have comprehensive personal data protection law. Singapore, Malaysia, Philippines, Laos, will Indonesia and Thailand plan to discuss in this year. And other than specific and comprehensive regulation, several countries also refer to a number of laws as the basis in handling their cybersecurity, such as computer crimes law, cybercrime law, information and technology law, and electronic transaction law. And the majority of ASEAN countries also refers to their conventional law in handling the cases related to cybercrime. And the last, what's the problem of human rights and the need to seek for an equilibrium to set up of the cyber security norms in the region? So currently there are many criticism from human rights institutions against the cybersecurity law material, considered as too much restricting freedom of expression and opening the potential intrusion to privacy arbitrarily, even without judicial oversight. The responding to trend to ensure the balance between the cybersecurity need and commitment to human rights, ASEAN countries and the need to formulate a joint standard in formulating legislation and national policy to build cooperation is not only at the technical level, but also the need to build joint principle and platform. And we can refer the commitment agreed by the country members of Freedom Online Coalition in the 10th meeting. They are released, the Freedom Online Coalition members, to respect of human rights obligation, etc., to place human rights as the basis in their each activity. And the last, the joint approach and the multi-stakeholder partnership in dealing with cybersecurity challenge must also always be held in ASEAN countries, either in the formulation of the policy or in the implementation of the policy or the technical level. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Wahyudi Djafar. Next, I will call Ms. Farlina Said to explain perhaps your opinion on what you take on ASEAN cybersecurity norms and maybe the challenge forward if you want. If not, then you can just explain of the Malaysian perspective.
Okay, so firstly, I wish to thank the organizers for doing a brilliant job in bringing the group that met last year together here today. I wish to also congratulate the team for putting together the book. Going third after such esteemed panelists gives me the luxury of concurring with what's been said. Also, to add my thoughts to the conversation at hand, I wish to actually reiterate what was mentioned, particularly in what norms actually mean for the region as brought by Mr. Sidraj, and also the challenges, particularly for government and in actually applying these norms into domestic processes. Norms, I wish to firstly backtrack the conversation to norms and its definitions. Norms, as previously discussed, can be codes of conduct that deems what is permitted, prohibited, or required. In a way, these norms actually inform states how to behave. Yet to do so, norms in a way have to be widely accepted. Thus, this acceptance process or the translation of this acceptance into practical processes for states mean that these norms have to be introduced, they have to be promoted, and finally cascaded into the normative landscape. To put things into perspective, more than 70 years have passed since nuclear bombs struck Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and norms on nuclear proliferation are still unfolding. In such a situation, states and non-state actors have participated in processes to not only articulate and propagate the norms, but also in processes that block such norms from becoming something that is settled into normative language. Today, a total of 191 states joined the Treaty on Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, which articulates acceptable state behaviors in regards to nuclear proliferation. such normative understanding of acceptable state behavior in cyberspace at the level of settled norms may be less prominent. As mentioned by previous speakers, UN processes yielded 3 reports. The first spoke of the need for norms, confidence-building measures, and capacity-building initiatives. The second spoke of the applicability of international law in maintaining peace and stability, as well as promote an open, secure, peaceful, and accessible ICT environment. The third introduced voluntary peacetime norms that spoke of acceptable state behavior. Against the backdrop of escalation, the peacetime norms spoke of state responsibility, particularly those on critical infrastructure, and certain confidence-building measures that actually assist in providing clarity and a type of predictability in what states do in cyberspace. The United Nations is not the only mechanism involved in norm entrepreneurship. The ASEAN Regional Forum and organizations such as Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe articulate confidence-building measures and capacity building as norms for stability. Other forms of non-entrepreneurship are also in the private sector, for instance, with Microsoft's drive for a Geneva Convention in cyberspace. Thus, it can be concluded that there are parts to cascading the organic process of norm setting, among which are the first, there has to be the promotion of the norms. The second is to tackle the issues that may prevent these norms from setting. And the third, to pursue these norms, to pursue conversations that shape these norms. ASEAN's role in norm setting and entrepreneurship can be limited, in my perspective, for 2 reasons. The first is the perspective of threats by the member states, and the second is dependent on the member states' capability to detect these threats. If norm entrepreneurship is dependent on domestic stimuli, Southeast Asian cybersecurity understanding may have a greater experience in the informational domain. For instance, disinformation and terrorist usages of cyberspace were among the first threats identified in Southeast Asian digitization landscape. As such, you actually have certain types of laws and regulations addressed towards these type of concerns because these concerns actually carry valid internal stability issues for some of the nation states. The lack of capability may hinder a state from prescribing to the norm. For instance, the UNGGE 2015 norm to ensure the internationally wrongful acts using ICTs do not emanate from within a state's territory require detection capabilities. As such, Southeast Asian strategic orientation and oftentimes complementary state practices to international norms may not necessarily require Southeast Asia to play the role of norm writers, but there is the need for them to complement international processes. Ingesting the norms, particularly the 11 placed by the UNGGE, is a possibility provided there is the growth in capability. So I'm actually on to my last point. The deadlock of conversations in the international arena may make it difficult for developing states to practice such norms, particularly if the focus currently is on capacity building. Additionally, with threats and misdemeanors of states uncovered by the day, for instance, how do rogue states, and what is rogue behavior? How do rogue states actually use cyberspace to advance their political agenda? These are landscapes that are actually still unfolding, and as such, the prescriptive and evaluative aspects of such norms may not be something that is concrete in the near future. However, ASEAN and Southeast Asian member states can do the best to protect the systems and develop capability as well as understanding for better promotion of the norms.
Thank you, Ms. Ferdinand. Thank you for keeping with the time as well. Last but not least, we have Mr. Bart Hogeveen that is coming far away from Canberra. How long was the flight, sir?
It's only 7 hours.
Oh, okay, very good. So I have requested somebody from outside the region to actually come and give a comment on how ASEAN actually building cyber norms, and perhaps from his international perspective, could compare it with other progress internationally or in other region. because it's something that was requested in our workshop. How is it ASEAN faring with compare with other regions? Perhaps if you also have some remarks or input that we can incorporate, please, time is yours.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. Thanks to Dr. Fitri for this kind introduction, and first of all, a great word of appreciation for CSIS to initiate and organizing this event. And I just want to like to remark that this is definitely not the first event that you guys organized. I had a look, and actually already in 2017, which is not that long ago, but still a while ago, especially in the cyber world, you organized one of these CISCAP cybersecurity workshops in Samarang. And I underlined one sentence in the report from that meeting, which was, the momentum to develop practical cooperation and cyber confidence building measures has slowed. And I think maybe that was the case maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago. I think we've entered a new era where that's no longer the case. And if I would like to bring one message across, I think this is the time for ASEAN, and with ASEAN I mean the organization, but the member states, let's say the whole ASEAN community, to kind of step up and start shaping their own opinion and view on cyberspace in terms of how it should develop, how it is developing, and what norms and confidence building measures should look like. So I'll try to touch on, let's say, your request to compare developments here in the region with some of the development elsewhere. At the same time, I would say that doesn't really matter. I think, and I'm of the opinion that what's happening here is up to ASEAN, the ASEAN community, to decide to make sure that, let's say, discussions in UN fora, in the ASEAN Regional Forum, within ASEAN, in dialogues with all your dialogue partners, and so on and so forth, it's up to ASEAN to decide what do you want the future of cyberspace to look like. So that said, I will try to, let's say, make some comparisons. I would also like to congratulate Kamlu and Paul Hukam, BSSN and the ASEAN Secretariat with receiving this great publication by CSIS. I think that's a great recognition of not just the multi-stakeholder approach, but also, I think, Indonesia's commitment to this topic, which is, of course, also exemplified by the fact that Indonesia was the last ASEAN member state on one of the UN groups of governmental experts. The luxury of being in my position, being the fourth and last speaker, and not being from a non-government organization, is that I can, let's say, be a little bit flexible in my talk. So I'll skip parts of my slides, so bear with me. Maybe what I would just like to highlight is what I would call ASEAN centrality. I know that's a common term within ASEAN, but I would actually like to make the point that this is the time. Maybe you can move to the slide which is called ASEAN centrality. Just one more and one more. Yeah, there we are. I deliberately cut this picture into two halves to put ASEAN in the center, as you can see, and not on the right-hand side of the slide. What I want to kind of show is that this is the moment where I think the world is looking on ASEAN to see what are the views and positions in this part of the world. The statement by the leaders in April last year and subsequently by the ministerial conference in September, I think were great achievements. An agreement, great achievement for a few reasons. Because I feel that, let's say, the initial work of the UNGGE, let's say all these UN processes, which already started in the late 1990s, and nothing like a recent endeavor, had a bit of a lukewarm reception here in the region. And I think there are a number of very legitimate reasons for that. As I think as some of the speakers referenced, ASEAN member states were never really part of the process. Malaysia and Indonesia being members, and of course Singapore playing a lead role. But that's just only, let's say, 30% of ASEAN, if you count it by number of member states. I also believe, and that's also reflected in the booklet that the CSIS published, is that the language of the UNGGE is very much a kind of war and peace language. One state doing something bad in another state, which kind of naturally, let's say, leads to discussions about what is acceptable behavior, what is an attack, what is not an attack, and things like that. Whereas what the ASEAN member states are primarily confronted with, at least in my analysis, is not war and peace scenarios of Indonesia launching a cyber attack on Singapore or vice versa. It's about combating cybercrime, how to deal with issues of disinformation and fake news, and in some countries also how, let's say, the terrorist use of social media. And these are things that are referenced by, let's say, these UN dialogues, but are not really at the core of the discussions in the UN. And another thing which I have been able to observe, and I think which was reflected by Mr. Sito as well, is that most of the governments in the ASEAN region, writ large, maybe Australia included, don't really know, let's say, what is this thing which is called the UNGGE, what are these norms processes, what is this open-ended study group that, for instance, also the ASEAN Regional Forum is launching. What is it? What is it amounting to? How does it impact on our positions and our national policies? Why should we at all engage? And also, how can we make a sensible contribution given the vast differences in, let's say, our development and our maturity in cyberspace? And I think finally, and that's maybe most concerning, is that the UNGGE process, including the reports from 2015, 2013, which were all agreed by consensus by 20 to 25 countries, geographically representative of let's say, the global world, I think are increasingly perceived as being a Western group of governmental experts, whereas that's factually not the case. But there is, I think, a perception issue there. So these are a few reasons why I think, let's say, so far, and I think this is changing right now, not so much attention has been paid to what's been happening there in Geneva, New York, and where else. But I think there is a renewed focus within ASEAN, a new window of opportunity, if you will, for ASEAN to engage, as well as an expectation from major cyberpowers in the world. And I think you can all, let's say, picture who are the major cyberpowers in the world, that they have expectations of ASEAN in terms of what do you guys believe, what are your positions, what are your views, and what are also your interests that are at stake, and how can we accommodate those? So I think the leader statement and the ministerial conference statement kind of is a recognition of the fact that the cyber domain in this part of the world has become an object of political interest, of military interest, economic, social, as well as infrastructural interest. It has become, or will become, many countries have this kind of digitalization or ICT development strategies, is becoming a key part of future society, if not already, but definitely the future economy, if not already. So I think there is a need, and I think we're not there yet, that we need to have a, let's say, collective discussion about what's the bandwidth within which current and future developments in the digital domain take place. So that's kind of, let's say, why I believe this is a great event, and I hope we'll have more of this, because this is where we kind of shape that discussion about ASEAN, and hopefully we'll come up with an ASEAN view. And it doesn't have to be, let's say, a homogeneous view, but a view at least. Now, some of our speakers have recognized the great progress made, and I've also made reference to those, to the leader statement and the ministerial conference. Now, the luxury of being non-government is that I can be a little bit controversial and may ask some difficult questions. If we go, let's say, one slide back, you see the picture of, let's say, the 10 ministers, and I think Sito is hiding somewhere in the background there, of the ministerial conference chairman's statement that was published in September this year during Singapore International Cyber Week. And we all referenced that, I think after years of deliberation, the leaders agreed or subscribed in principle to the 11 recommendations from the UN report. Now, I'm intrigued by this word "in principle," because I've never seen it anywhere else, not in let's say, other statements of leaders or ministers in different parts of the world. So what does "in principle" mean? Hopefully one of you will be able to explain to me, because I think it can mean three things. One is the ministers wholeheartedly endorse everything that the UNGGE has been doing. That's one scenario. The other scenario is, well, there's not so much, let's say, to fundamentally disagree with, but we still have, let's say, serious concerns and we're not, let's say, overly convinced, but generally we can agree. Or the third thing is this debate about norms and this UN document. I mean, it really doesn't really impact on what we're doing nationally. So yeah, I can subscribe in principle, but I can just do as I feel fit. So I think that's the key word. So despite all the progress, which I recognize and which I really applaud, and I think not just, let's say, from my, let's say, research perspective and being active in, let's say, the track 2 world in this, but also, yeah. Now you interrupted my flow. No, oh yeah, we can't do that. But also, let's say, from perspective from the Australian government, I think that they're really happy with that this is happening with and within ASEAN. Now, a few risks there. If you subscribe in principle to something, the risk is with implementation. How do we make this concrete? How do we make this? How do we ensure adoption? Because if you subscribe to something and then you don't adopt, then what's the value of any let's say, next decisions that you advocate? So one thing is, one risk that I see is that ASEAN is, let's say, put in a position where it's kind of pulled into different directions. One, let's say, into the let's say the camp where the US is the greatest proponent, and the other camp where the Russians are taking a leadership role. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but I think ASEAN has to, let's say, kind of define its own role and position there. And secondly, indeed, how do we make sure adoption? And can you please go to my last slide, because I think this is, I think, maybe the most interesting part. Well, fun. How do we get from statements to action? How to encourage adoption and implementation? And I think we all have been, let's say, struggling with that. Because if there is a norm, for instance, international law applies online as it does offline, how do you make that happen? How do you prove that? How do you adopt that? Well, I think there are a few things here that we can do. And there's a role for governments, for industry, for civil society like our own institutions, as well as, let's say, just people in the room, and users, as they're called in cyberspace for some strange reason. 5 things. How to move to adoption and implementation. I think we need to get to a point where everyone, not just, let's say, a few people who have been in this domain for too long, are able to really explain and understand and apply what do these norms really mean. Because it's kind of, let's say, UN political diplomatic language. What does it really mean for governments, for agencies? Also start communicating what are our views. There is an annual call from the UN Secretary General for countries to submit their national view of what's happening in their country as well as in their region, and only so far from within ASEAN, only Brunei and Singapore have submitted that annual report. So I think there's some work to be done. But also, some of the confidence-building measures that Mr. Situ referenced. In ASEAN, we've been talking about it for ages, and there's nothing complicated or really controversial about them. But let's start doing them, or assign someone or contract somebody to start doing them. And I think there's a key role for the ASEAN Secretariat. So I was really happy to see them here represented as well. Also to define what are the tools of diplomacy that ASEAN has in the cyber realm, because you can say this is a norm, but if there is no, I would call it diplomatic action that would either deter or punish or prevent things from happening, then it's a kind of an empty shell. So what tools does ASEAN have available, ASEAN member states? And finally, develop some metrics and benchmarks for what constitutes proper adoption for ASEAN. And I think that's only a discussion that the ASEAN community can have themselves. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Bart. We now have 10 minutes for Q&A, including the trigger question that's excellently being presented by Mr. Hogeveen. If any of the panelists would like to later, after we get collected question from the floor, as well answer Mr. Bart, what does in principle mean, perhaps from the government, or Ms. Farlina, if you join the meeting, perhaps you would know what is the in principle means and how the challenge of adoption. And perhaps the big question is, how do you make capacity building effective, right? What's the metrics there? Very, very good point to raise. I would call for maybe a couple of questions from the floor. 1 and 2, yeah, first 2 maybe, and then we gonna, any more? Only 2? Okay. 2 questions, please, sir. Oh, 3. Okay, that's the last 3. Yeah, first, gentleman in the front jacket.
Thank you very much. It's very enlightening explanation and expose from 4 of you experts in this matter. I'm a second illiteracy in cyber or computer, but let me put it this way. If you want to avoid cyber crime, give up computer. That's not the way it is. We still need computer. And I'm interested in the presentation from the gentleman from ELSAM. It's about cooperation, not only technically, but also, I make note here, sorry. I'm going to make it short. Not only technically, but also joint principle and platform. I think we have to think about that, because the cyber crime, it's unimaginable. The degree of intrusiveness is unimaginable and pretty much disastrous. Not only like when we are talking about nuclear weapons, because the technology in ICT, it's much more easier rather than we have built a nuclear weapon. In the nuclear issues, we don't have such kind of norm. Only the NPT, CTBT, and that's it. But still there is a breach, and sometimes we are compromised. How do we now, as a human being, as a civilized human being, creating such kind of a norm, not only talking about ASEAN, but globally? Because those perpetrators, hackers, they don't have norms. And penetrating or touching into the issues of ICT, it's for them it's not like having a degree from university, Princeton or Yale. They just have that kind of capability. And with their criminal minds, they penetrate even into our privacy. Let's think about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
And I am Hadrianto Iskandar. I am an independent consultant, former diplomat.
Sir Hadrianto, next.
Thank you very much. My name is Rio. I'm an international relations scholar from Universitas Diponegoro. My question is kind of similar with the previous question, where talking about how these criminals doesn't have any norms. That from the interesting talks, it's very interesting, but I find it kind of underwhelming because I don't find it anything new. It's always about high politics. It's always government, state actors, and etc. But I haven't find it the way to make this issue, the cybersecurity issue, down to earth. How the people who actually access the cyber world, because cyber world is not a nuclear, not similar to the nuclear issue. Civilians doesn't use nuclear weapons, but ordinary civilians, we use internet, we access cyber space every day, every second. So is there any way to bring this issue from the high political ground to the low political ground? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rio. Gentleman at the back with the glasses, your question still holds? Or? Oh, it's on being questioned. Okay, maybe I go around first from Mr. Wahyudi Djafar to answer the question, and perhaps later on, maybe Bart can ask how to make the issue cybersecurity earthen the issue, and then maybe Mr. Sitorich and Ms. Farlina can answer. What does in principle means, please?
Thank you for the question. The first, I will discuss about how the purpose of the cybersecurity, how we define of the cybersecurity, and what is the purpose of the cybersecurity. The first, the cybersecurity to protect of the individual's rights, and the second to protect of the devices, and the third to protect of the internet connection or the internet access as part of the critical infrastructure of the nation. So, based on the purpose of the cybersecurity, the country can develop of the models of regulation, and the next, how the global responds to the situation. In the global level, there are so many initiatives to creating the norms of cybersecurity. The governmental group of experts to the cybersecurity established by the UNs, and the others groups in the Human Rights Council also. In the last year, they discussed about the Geneva Digital Convention to discuss how to develop of the international convention, especially to the regarding of the cyber and also the all of the ICTs growing. And the other initiative, the coalition of the country look like of a Freedom Online Coalition as a group, how to implement, how to integrating of the human rights principles in the level of the in the concrete of the instrument to regulate of the ICTs. I think until now, the country in the world still in progress to discuss where is the level of norms or what is the levels or models of the cybers. Because there is no common approval how to developing of the instrument or the law to regulate of the cyber. The Internet Governance Forum just conducting a discussion, but there is no the strong what is the instrument or legally binding process, etc. And in the words, so many models to creating the regulatory framework to as a reference to regulate of the internets, look like of the self-regulatory model. We give to the private sector to creating the self-regulatory models or the direct regulation models, look like in the several countries, look like of China's and the others country, how the state take the dominant part to regulate of the internet and conduct all of the control to limitation of the internet, or the others initiative we develop of the co-regulation models, how based on the multi-stakeholders platform we creating the new norms including how the peoples or the internet users, the academics, and the business sector, etc., can open discuss to creating the new norms to regulate of the internet. So I think it is the challenging for us in the ASEAN levels, especially because we have the soft instrument, ASEAN Human Rights Declaration, and the ASEAN Human Rights Declaration recognize of the several the fundamental freedoms involved of the freedom of expression, right to privacy, etc. But how to adopt of the instrument in the cybersecurity norms, how to develop of the protection in the level of the cybersecurity norm. So based on the need, we have of the so many meeting or discussing to implement of the principles and or to developing of the principles in the level of the ASEAN as a application of the joint statement from the ASEAN ministerial meetings. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wahyudi Djafar. Next, perhaps Mr. Bart can answer. The criminal does not have norms. How to make the issue down to earth as well for normal people, please?
Yeah, well, that's an excellent question, and I think, I mean, just bear with us that since of course we are at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, that we're talking about high politics and typical international relations stuff. But I think it's a key question. How do we make this down to earth? How do we make it kind of understandable and comprehensible for normal people? And I think one thing to recognize here is that, let's say, everything that's happening in the digital space is a kind of a trusted environment. I mean, I don't, and I think hardly anyone in the room understands how it really works. But we are able to use it because we trust it to a large extent, right? That trust is kind of maybe similar to, let's say, your currency, that if you have 100,000 rupiah, that you're able to buy something with it. If you don't trust it will buy you something, then let's say, of course, the currency collapses. So it's a trusted environment. Now that's still, let's say, kind of fluffy language. I understand that. The thing is with cybercrime, and I think on the one hand it's very complicated, and on the other hand, in terms of responses, it's very straightforward. Cybercrime is regulated by each nation's criminal law. So if there is a cybercrime, it's your law enforcement, police authorities who are supposed to either investigate or prosecute and things like that. What we have seen happening, I think, over the last decade is that all countries in the world, also here in the region, have tremendously developed their policing capabilities in this realm. We also realized that in combating cybercrime, and I think Indonesia, correct me if I'm wrong, is kind of number 2 in the world in terms of being a recipient as well as an originator of cyber attacks and criminal activities. And that's not saying that Indonesia is a cybercrime country. It's the fact that Indonesia's infrastructure is being misused by criminal actors. But it's regulated by your national legislation. I think that's one thing to keep in mind. But also there is a norm, or I would say there is an international convention which talks about how to tackle cybercrime and how to cooperate, how one law enforcement agency can cooperate with another law enforcement agency, which is called the Budapest Convention. I'm not sure how many ASEAN states have signed up to that. I think maybe just a few. How to make it tangible for, let's say, normal people? I don't really know. And maybe these are two different worlds as well. Let's say the high politics world and the low politics world. But I think it's up to the high politics world, to policymakers, to academics, to people within agencies like the BSSN, to make sure that you and I keep on trusting the digital environment. Recognizing that cybercrime is a high reward, a low risk endeavor. But that said, I think things are progressing, but I don't have a clear-cut answer, but just a few reflections. Sorry about it.
Thank you for your answer, Mr. Bart. I think I want to tell you that Indonesia currency is threatening. I hope it's okay. That Indonesia's currency is threatening, so more people trust on the Indonesian rupiah. And we acknowledge, perhaps from the statistic, Indonesia is ranked number 2 from the country as a source as well as the country that tries to tackle cybercrime. Exactly because what you mentioned of Indonesia cyber infrastructure that still needs and development, and also the public awareness that CSIS is trying to do, also with this publication on what is cyber norms, what is Indonesia is doing. So hopefully we will have more education and public awareness event. And also what I want to say that attribution in the cyber attacks, cyber realm is a bit difficult. So of course I'm defending Indonesia here. So, but thank you.
I mean, not as a critic, but I just wanted to give some examples from Indonesia.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I'm joking. Okay, and then the most difficult question for ASEAN, perhaps, what does it mean for the ASEAN leader accepted the UN norms of the responsible state behavior in the cyber realm in principle? Perhaps.
Okay. So
Mr.
thank you. I think it's not a difficult question. I would put it to, I'll make 3 points very quickly, and I want to
address a little bit about cybercrime. The first is that the UNGG report was adopted by the UN General Assembly in 2015. So all our countries were already adopting it. So I just want to make that clear. It was not something that came out of nowhere. It was presented at the UN General Assembly. The second thing is that I went back to the ASEAN.org to look at the document, and I suspected there was a bit more words than what was quoted. They subscribe in principle, and then it says, as well as to focus on regional capacity building in implementing these norms. So the participants in the meeting subscribed in principle and wanted to focus on implementing these norms. I think the answer is there. Subscribing in principle because we work as ASEAN, and there are 10 countries in ASEAN with many differing levels of capacity in implementing these norms. Which is easier, to say I accept everything and do nothing about it, or to say I subscribe in principle and do something to implement them, which is to build capacity? Further in the statement, it says that this is sent to the various sectorals for consideration and work on it, because that's how ASEAN works. There are different sectorals. The norms applied differently in the cybercrime, in the defense, ADMM, AMMTC, in the ICT sectoral. So I think it's not a difficult question. Subscribe in principle, but it was not just left there. There is a concrete work being done in capacity building in the various sectorals and in ASEAN. So that's one thing. Second thing about cybercrime, I'm not sure that the norms conversation applies. If you take norms to be voluntary, the problem is that criminals do not accept norms of society. If it would be a beautiful world if we said, do not kill each other, and everybody accepted it. The problem is criminals don't accept it. So there is a need, as I think Bart said, for cybercrime laws. Criminals respond to laws. People who want to live in peace and harmony and stability respond to norms. I just want to make that quick thing. Last thing, I just want to say this. Mainstreaming cybersecurity is an issue because of the technology. Most of our parents could teach us how to brush our teeth. Very few of our parents can teach us how to protect ourselves online because they did not grow up in that generation, right? So your child will not learn how to have good passwords, most likely from the parents. But as the generation matures, we will learn how to do it. So soon enough, we'll all be brushing teeth, I promise you. Thank you.
Thank you. Excellent. Excellent remark. Maybe Ms. Farlina can give a comment, and then we put the session to a close.
Actually, I feel like all the questions have just been answered. All the questions were addressed very well. So I probably don't really have anything new to add to the conversation, except probably like in regards to the non-state behaviors. It is, for me, it actually just seems pretty simple. You actually need the laws, and hence you actually have the enforcement. To put things into perspective, if you're actually saying that there are people who do defy some of these norms due to criminal behavior or for any type of reason, for instance, if you actually have, say, the laws of armed conflict and people who are actually involved in the armed conflict, there's the lack of awareness in those areas. So perhaps it's actually about awareness, laws, and enforcement. The second part in regards to norm setting on the ground about certain types of cyber hygiene practices can actually be in the hands of the private sector, because those are standards that are actually practiced by people. And the thing is, in the ASEAN region, you actually find that some of the conversation on these norms are in the international relations and seems impractical. But if you're actually looking at places like Germany, where some of the cybersecurity practices are propagated by the private sector, those are actually levels that can be tackled at the lower and in the lower end. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Farlina. Ladies and gentlemen, this session comes to a close. May I ask for your willingness to give appreciation to our panelists? I give the floor to the MC, please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fitriani, for guiding the discussion. Distinguished guests, I would like to remind the 51st attendees who has received the coupon earlier that the publication can only be claimed after the closing of the event. Now, you are now welcomed to enjoy a coffee break outside this auditorium before we continue to the second panel session that will start at 10:45. Thank you. Yes. The coffee break is for 10 minutes, so 10:50 it is. Thank you.